is about getting to know my grandpa, Frank. It's called Lunch with Frank. And this precedes, in the book, this precedes a long interview about Frank when I first got to know him, about his life and all the jobs that he walked out on. This is the introduction. Lunch with Frank. The first time I went to lunch with my grandfather Frank, I was 23. It wasn't that we didn't get along, it was just that he had never been part of my life. He was only 16 when my father was born. He and my grandmother Peaches had only stayed married for a total of 6 months. Frank took me to the Black Angus. Before we went into the restaurant, Frank pointed up at the large neon sign. When I was going to school in Eugene, we used to go here for lunch. The G was burnt out in the sign. It was noon on a weekday in Eugene, Oregon. There was hardly anyone else in the restaurant. The special was ground sirloin. Frank asked the waitress if the meat was ground on the premises. What do you mean? I mean, do you get the meat in a big hunk and grind it here, or do you get it already ground up into steaks? Steaks. It's already ground up, said the waitress. Well, I don't want that. I'll have the salmon and a glass of red wine. What kind of red wine would you like? We have Cabernet and Merlot. That sounds good. Which one? Red. Cabernet. Fine. I ordered a hamburger. After the waitress walked away, Frank explained that he'd stopped eating ground meat because he'd heard how the meat came from a bunch of different cows and how there was probably shit in the meat all ground up together. He held up his hand. I don't judge you for getting a hamburger, though. When the wine came, Frank swallowed it all in one gulp. I hate the taste of red wine, he said. Then why did you order it? It's good for you to have 1 glass of red wine a day. It's good for your heart. I also eat a handful of walnuts every day. Frank told me he didn't like walnuts either, but they were also supposed to be good for you. As we ate, Frank described a special diet to me. Every night, I boil vegetables till they're soft. I eat the vegetables, and then I drink the water I boiled them in. Vegetables lose some of their vitamins when you boil them, so I drink the water to get some of the vitamins back. After lunch, I excused myself to have a cigarette outside. Frank paid the bill and came out and leaned against the siding. You know, he said, you can tell me anything you want. Just because I'm an old man, it doesn't mean you can't tell me about drugs. I used to do some of that myself, you know. For a moment, I wished I did have some crazy drug story to tell Frank, but I didn't. I couldn't figure out exactly what he wanted anyway. I knew that Frank had worked at the women's prison in Salem for 30 years before he retired. Maybe he thought all young people were into using drugs. We got in the car and he started to drive me home. He asked me what my favorite movies were. I said that one of my all-time favorite musicals was West Side Story. I hate that movie, he said. Why? Because it takes something serious like gang violence and turns into a joke with everyone singing and dancing around. He rolled his eyes. I guess I never thought about it that way, I said. What's your favorite musical, I asked. Chicago. A couple months later, Frank and I went to the only Indian restaurant in Eugene, and I asked him about TV shows. It turned out he was still very traditional when it came to gender roles. He told me that he didn't like the TV show Voyager, the Star Trek spinoff, because the ship had a female captain. It just didn't seem realistic, he said. What kind of shows do you like, I asked. What's that one called? Love and Marriage, Babies in a Baby Carriage. You mean Married with Children? That's the one. I love that show. About a year and a half later, Frank and my grandmother remarried after a 50-year separation. Frank moved in with my grandma in Gresham and didn't visit me in Eugene as often. Soon I had to share him with all my other siblings. He started playing chess with my brother on Wednesdays. Simone, my little sister, played pool with him on Mondays. He babysat my sister Anna's kids and went out to dinner with my parents on a nearly weekly basis. He even got a huge painting commissioned of him and Simone playing pool. It hangs in his living room next to the family portrait. Frank and Peaches at 16, fresh-faced and grinning in the snow of Mount Hood. Frank and his deceased wife, Anne. Frank's son, Alex, outside their house in Salem. Frank with a full head of hair. Frank bald with a beard. And finally, the portrait of him and my grandmother, taken shortly after their second wedding. Frank is grinning. I look like the vice principal of a grade school in that one, he says. Thank you so much for coming.